So have we been talking? Hi, sorry about that, everyone. I think we had an audio glitch. So let me walk you guys through the beginning part that you missed. Welcome to today's webinar brought to you by Keyline Interactive. My name is Kelly Nersess, and I'll be your host this afternoon. Sorry about that minor glitch in audio. We really appreciate everyone taking their time out to join us today for this webinar, and we're excited to talk with Keyline Interactive's Principal Researcher and Director Andrew Schall and Facebook's User Experience Researcher Jennifer Romano-Bergstrom. They're going to be taking a deep dive into eye tracking and mobile user experience. Eye tracking has become more accessible to UX professionals and can be considered really pertinent in this industry. This method has expanded just beyond large screens, and now it's becoming important for mobile users since, in this day and age, that platform has become the preferred interface. So let's take a look at our agenda for today. In the next 45 minutes, we really want to empower viewers with the knowledge of how eye tracking can be applied to their mobile user research projects and tips that could be considered. We're going to take a look at best practices for conducting a successful mobile eye tracking study. And lastly, we're going to give you guys the opportunity to submit your questions, and we're going to have a Q&A portion at the end to get those answered for you. Without further ado, let me go ahead and introduce our co-presenters. So our first presenter today is Keyline Interactive's very own Andrew Schall. He has over a decade of experience as a UX researcher and is currently our principal researcher and director. Andrew's worked with numerous public and private organizations to use eye tracking as part of their user-centered design process. His eye tracking projects have ranged from understanding the browsing behavior of online shoppers to measuring engagement during mobile gameplay. I'm also excited to announce and introduce our second presenter, as you all may know from Facebook, Jennifer Romano-Bergstrom, and she's currently the user experience researcher over at Facebook. Jennifer's been conducting quantitative and qualitative user-centered research for over 12 years. She often uses eye tracking as a tool to understand users' processing and a tool to understand the processing and attention while they work on mobile, desktop, or paper. Jennifer and Andrew recently co-authored a new book called Eye Tracking and User Experience Design that addresses the applications of eye tracking in the user experience research. They're also going to be sharing all-day tutorial at the upcoming Human Computer International Conference. So before getting this conversation started, let's just quickly cover a couple of guidelines to keep in mind through the next 45 minutes. We want this talk to be interactive for you guys, so there's 2 channels where you can ask questions in real time during this webinar. You can post your question in the chat window that you should see on your screen, or you can follow our conversation via Twitter and use the hashtag KLIEvents. We have a lot of time at the end of this discussion for Q&A, and we're going to do our best to get to everyone's questions. For questions that we may not get a chance to answer, we will email you directly once the webinar has been completed, and we'll get those answers for you guys, so don't you worry. With that said, let me go ahead and jump it off and pass it over to Jen. This is a great place for you to start.
Thanks so much, Kelly, and thank you, everybody, for joining us today. Okay, so I will be starting off talking about, in general, eye tracking and user experience research. So as many of you may already know, a lot of the metrics that we use when we're evaluating the user experience are self-report measures. So this is actually talking to participants in our studies and understanding what their perceptions of their experience are. So for example, we often ask people to rate various aspects of their satisfaction using a product. We may ask people to rate the difficulty, their perceived difficulty in completing tasks. We often utilize a think aloud protocol. So while people are completing tasks, we ask them to keep a running commentary of their thoughts. Sometimes at the end, we may do a retrospective think aloud where we ask them to watch a video replay and tell us what they were thinking while they were trying to complete various tasks. And we often use a debriefing interview. So at the end of the session, follow up with people about what they were experiencing, what they were thinking, why they clicked, why they didn't click, things like this. So these are very valuable, very rich data points, and they're more centered on the user's perception of their experience. Really great, really useful, really important, really easy to collect. I don't think I've ever observed or been involved in a user experience or usability study where these metrics weren't used. However, they're not enough. We also want to make sure that we are collecting observational data. And these are important because these are actually measuring the user's behavior. So it's not just what they think about their experience, but what they're actually doing. So things like first click accuracy or task accuracy, whether or not people can actually complete these tasks. Or, if they have their first click that's accurate, but then they get lost somewhere along the way, actually recording those click behaviors and understanding more about their behavior and what's working well and what's not working well. We often collect time data, so efficiency data, how long it takes people to complete tasks or how long they spend on a given page before moving on. And sometimes we collect conversion rates. So at what point in the experience do people register for a newsletter or decide to open a bank account? So these data are really important because, again, these are measuring the participants' behavior. It's moving beyond their perceptions of the experience and what they think, what they think they're doing and why they think they're doing what they're doing, but actually measuring concretely what they're actually doing. And this is really important too when we do iterative testing, because we want to be able to measure behavior change as the design changes. So self-report, observational data, very common types of data that we collect. But in addition, it's important to collect physiological measurements. So this is really where the eye tracking comes in. So eye tracking is the more common. It's pretty easy to collect nowadays. We'll show you some examples of some modern day eye tracking. It's getting easier and easier, less expensive to use as a tool as we're collecting usability and user experience data. In addition, we can collect electrodermal activity or galvanic skin response to understand users' excitement. Again, we don't know if that is positive excitement, are they happy that they're seeing something on the screen, or if it's more frustration. So we want to couple that with some of these other measures. And then things like pupil dilation as well can measure excitement. So it's really best to take a triangulated approach, understand what's happening physiologically while people are interacting with an interface or with a product, what their actual behavior is, those are our observational metrics, and then what their perceptions of their experience are, that self-report data. So why add eye tracking to our user experience research? We know that those self-report and those observational data are really valuable and they're really rich, but eye tracking can give us additional data that can make our findings and our interpretations even richer and give us a more well-rounded understanding of the user's experience. So for example, some of the data that we collect in user experience testing when we don't have eye tracking include mouse movements, clicks, and comments, as I mentioned. But when we add eye tracking now, we can evaluate things like scan paths and dwell time, first fixation, refixation. So if people continuously look back and forth between elements and don't make a click, or look back and forth and finally make a click, this gives us a deeper understanding of those mouse movements and those clicks and those comments. Additionally, when we report findings in typical user experience testing, we report the problems. We usually report the positive findings as well as the problems, but really it's focused on what those usability problems are that we detected during testing. Adding eye tracking actually gives us insight into the sources of those issues. So for example, you may find that people don't click on something, but we don't really know why. And we may go back and look at the eye tracking data and find out that they never looked at that element at all. So that might be a problem with the placement of the element. Or we may look at the eye tracking data and find that they continuously looked to the element but never actually engaged with it. So it gives us a richer understanding of that usability problem. That this very important thing was never actually clicked on, was never interacted with. And then we can follow up and look at our other data to understand more about that. Additionally, we provide recommendations whenever we're doing testing, and usually our recommendations when we don't have eye tracking are based on those more typical data, the self-report and the behavioral data, and of course our experience as user experience professionals, and available heuristics and things that we know about how products work. But when we add eye tracking, our recommendations tend to be more precise and a little bit more insightful because, again, we have a greater understanding of how people are processing and interacting with a product. So a summary of the three kind of buckets of data. And again, we like to use a triangulated approach, so we don't use any of these in isolation. The self-report metrics are very important. They tell us why people focus on certain aspects, or at least why they think they do, right? This is, again, their perceptions of their experience. Our observational metrics are very important, our behavioral metrics. These tell us how participants actually do things, how they're actually navigating, how they're actually interacting. And then our eye tracking tells us specifically what people are looking at, how long they're looking at things, how often they're looking at things. So this gives us greater insight into design elements. And again, we want to use a combination of these three different types of measures to give us a more holistic understanding of perceptions and behaviors. One thing I want to mention is that we don't use eye tracking in isolation. Sometimes we'll have clients say we want to do an eye tracking study. And it's not an eye tracking study. It's always, you want to always look at your eye tracking data in the context of what people were actually trying to do. So again, going back to that behavioral data, just understanding what people are looking at is not really informative. We want to give participants tasks and then see how they interact and what they look at while they're trying to complete those tasks. So again, we don't do eye tracking studies. We do usability studies or user experience studies, and eye tracking is another tool, another method, additional data that we're collecting during the study. So we don't need to go into detail here about all these different metrics, but this is just to demonstrate that eye tracking, the method collects a lot of data. There's a lot that we can get out of collecting eye tracking data, whether that be focused on participants' engagement, focused on processing, the order in which people are looking at things while they're trying to complete tasks, how long it takes people to actually find things, or where they're looking before they actually find something, processing order, comprehension, how well people understand things, if they need to continuously read things over and over to actually understand things, or if they have a more scanning pattern, maybe they're not reading at all. And then workload. So when we look at things like pupil dilation, as I mentioned earlier, we can look at things like workload and excitement. Usually it depends on, actually I shouldn't say, I think always it depends on the project goals, and we determine which metrics we're going to use, which type of data we're going to look at. All of this data is collected, so the good thing is you can always go back later. You know, if you have a new research question, you can always go back and look at the eye tracking data. But usually we go in with some sort of research goals. We want to understand, you know, how people are completing tasks, what they're looking at to complete these tasks. Or we want to understand if people engage with this really important red box on the bottom of the screen, which surprisingly, you know, they may never look at because it might be perceived as an ad. So usually we go in with some concrete goals and things that we want to understand, things that we want to learn, and we decide what types of data we're going to examine. And again, it's all collected, so you can go back later. We do that oftentimes too, where we go back at the end of the study, and based on something that we noticed during the sessions, then we go back and look at additional data as well. So why is this important? What can we learn from using eye tracking when we're evaluating mobile user experiences? I'm going to share some findings here before I turn it over to Andrew, and he will share some findings as well. So one thing that we have seen over and over is that people do not read. We know this from desktop, and we know it now in mobile as well. Designers try to fit a lot into those small screens, and we still are in the habit of trying to give people instructions on how to use our products. People don't read them. In this example here on the left image, they're circled in orange. There were instructions, and actually above that in green, there were additional instructions. And what we found was that people did not read those instructions. They went right to the actionable part of the screen. We find this over and over. In the middle and on the right are gaze plots from a participant who was attempting to complete this task. And this is just an example of one participant in the study, but this was something that we saw over and over with other participants in the study as well. They just missed the instructions totally and just went right to the actionable area. We see this a lot in forms and surveys. where there's a lot of instructions on how to use the form and how to use the survey, but people want to just get to the actionable area and do what they need to do and move on, with their busy day. So again, this is something we've seen on desktop, and now we're seeing it over and over on mobile as well. Similarly, we see issues with error messages. So error messages need to be clear. They need to tell people how to recover from their errors. In this example here, the participants received this error when they didn't complete all of their fields. The error just said, fill all mandatory fields. Not very informative, right? That doesn't tell people. It tells people that there's a field that is not that has not been completed, but it doesn't tell people where to go to complete to recover from that error, to actually fill in that mandatory field. There was no icon to indicate that there was an error. There was just no indication whatsoever, a circled area or this error message being near the error, nothing to indicate to the user where the error was. And as you can see from the gaze plot on the right, this was after the participant clicked on the OK buttons, and they clicked on the OK button, the error message went away. They looked all over the screen trying to find that error. It wasn't clear where to go. A useful error message would tell people exactly what the problem was, and then they'd be able to easily find it. They could recover from the error and then move on with their busy day. So people need to know what to do next when there's some sort of a process. Another thing that we have learned is that people attend to elements of displays differently across devices. And this is really important when we think about the different types of devices, the different types of screen size, and how important it is to actually test these different versions. Now, with the number of versions we have nowadays with devices, it's probably impossible to test them all. But it is important to test a number of different ones, especially ones that are dramatically different. So in this particular study, we tested an app version on the iPad and on the smartphone, and then we also tested the desktop version, the website of this product on the iPad. And we found that, so what we're looking at are heat maps across all of the participants in the study. The red spots are the hot spots, or the areas that are getting more attention. And we find that on the two outside images, the one on the left is the iPad, and the one on the right is the smartphone. People were looking to the correct area. The place they needed to go to complete this task is that icon that was in the upper left-hand corner of that quadrant. But when we moved to the desktop version on the iPad, that icon, the display looks completely different. The icon is actually on the lower right. You can kind of see it there. It's that blue screen. And people weren't looking there. This big image that was in the middle of the screen really took people's attention. And on the desktop, while that big banner-like image still took up a lot of screen space, it took up less screen space than it did on the iPad. So we didn't have the same problem with desktop. So this was important to assess, important to understand how people were engaging, and important to understand the differences across devices. So our recommendation here was to make that iPad version similar, whether it was this desktop version or the horizontal view in the iPad, similar to the app version, what we see on the right and the left, because that was really clear where people needed to go to complete tasks, and there wasn't this overwhelming banner type image taking the attention of the users. So a number of different questions that mobile eye tracking may be able to answer for us. These are some of the common ones that people come to us and that people want to understand. So for example, sustained attention. How long do people look away from the screen? Maybe they're thinking about something and they're looking away. Maybe they need to grab some other information, so they're looking away from the screen. So how long does it take them to come back and be engaged with our product? And then reacquire what they were focusing on. So once they re-engage with the screen, how long does it take them to actually get back to what they were working on, or are they easily distracted? And similar to the example that I just showed, are elements the appropriate size for mobile? Or sometimes things need to be tweaked. Sometimes you need to tweak that desktop version because it's not rendering properly on mobile. And only by testing mobile will we understand that. Things like guided direction. So where do people look while they complete tasks? This is one of the most common things that we assess when we are using eye tracking in our studies. Do eyes follow the intended sequence? So oftentimes designers will say, this is what people are supposed to do. So then we put it into the user's hands and see if they do it the way the designers and developers have intended. Are people distracted by elements that aren't critical to the task? Andrew's going to show some examples with advertisements. But in addition to advertisements, sometimes there are just additional things on the screen that we feel are important to have on the screen. But then when we put our product into the hands of end users, we find that those things are not critical to what they need to do, but they're actually distracting and lead to clutter. And then, of course, engagement. These are really common things that people want to understand too. What features do people notice while they're interacting with a product? How much content do people actually consume? Is there too much? Is there too little? And do people notice things like advertisements or other important elements on the screen? So I'm going to turn it over to Andrew now, and he is going to talk a little bit now about how this actually works, what this actually looks like.
Hi, everyone. Thanks very much, Jen. Glad to be here. So exactly. So hopefully we've piqued your interest about eye tracking with mobile devices. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about how all this works. What technology is available for your use. How do you decide which technology is the best for what you're trying to learn? As eye tracking evolves, there are refinements to existing technology. There are new exciting things like the eye tracking glasses that I'll talk a little bit about. But it's really important to understand what the pros and cons of these tools are and what you can ultimately do with them. So just a little bit of background. So I've been doing eye tracking, and Jen as well, for a very long time. So we've had the opportunity to see the evolution of eye tracking. So not that long ago, no, these are not medieval torture devices. These actually are eye trackers. It was very difficult for people in the UX industry to actually do eye tracking because it's very hard to do think aloud while your participant has a bite bar in their mouth. So we've come a very long way. Eye tracking today, as you can see in these examples here, is far less intrusive, much more natural, much more flexible, and allows us to track many different kinds of devices. So you can see that in the top left, we have an example of eye tracking glasses, which I'll talk about, which can track anything the participant's seeing. In the bottom left-hand corner, you can see an example of a mobile eye tracking stand. And I'm going to be talking primarily about those two different kinds of technologies, which really lend themselves well to mobile research kinds of studies. So the first one I'm going to talk about is actually what we call the mobile eye tracking stand. And there are different manufacturers that produce these. There are different kind of generations. You can see two examples here. But the general concept with using a mobile eye tracking stand is that it's fixed. So you have your iPad, your iPhone, your tablet, your smartphone, and it's sort of pasted onto this stand. And you have an overextending camera that is then capturing what the participant is seeing. And then the eye tracking software then overlays the eye gaze data on top of that. Jen and I have used this kind of technology many, many times, different applications. It works fairly well, but it's important to understand why we would use this particular kind of device over, say, the eye tracking glasses. And in my experience, I really select the stand when I really need to make sure I can compare data across participants very effectively. So if you have a sample size of 40 people, you want to make sure that the eye tracker is seeing the eye gaze and the overlay in the exact same way across all 40 participants. Otherwise, you're going to have a lot of manual data analysis to do after the fact. So the fact that the device is fixed, the eye tracker itself is fixed, allows us to then overlay things like areas of interest, which Jen mentioned. Areas of interest basically is a way of kind of carving up your interface like a turkey and saying that we want to understand very specific elements on the page. We want to understand the performance of those elements. Those metrics can be broken down in some very common ones that Jen and I use, like time to first fixation. So basically, it's how quickly did they notice some of those elements on the screen. Fixation count and duration, how many times did they look at that particular element in any given period of time, how long in a period of time did they stare at that particular area. Those are really metrics that we want to be able to quantify and do statistics with and really understand the performance metrics. In a moment, I'll show you an example of how those metrics can be applied. You can also, the fact that these can be overlaid on top of each other across participants makes it very easy to generate heat maps, which we've probably seen in many different situations, or cluster diagrams, or some of the eye gaze plot diagrams, where we want to be able to overlay that data in aggregate across many, many participants. And the fact, again, the stand allows us to sort of lock things down, makes that really practical and very easy to do. So this is an example from a recent study that I did. It was a mobile game, probably one that many of you have played before. And we were interested in two metrics. We really want to understand mobile advertising. So the company involved developed a dynamic ad that had animations to it versus sort of a more static ad. And again, we used areas of interest. We carved up particular areas of the interface to really understand how quickly did they notice those ads when they animated or appeared in, and then also how long were they looking at it? How long were they actually engaged in the ad? And then was there a fundamental difference between the dynamic ads that were appearing versus the static? And again, because we used the stand, it made data analysis for that much, much easier. You can see here that in this case, the lower bar for time to first fixation is really good because we actually noticed that the dynamic ads were noticed much quicker than the static ones. And the other graph, we're talking about duration, how long were they engaged with the ad. The dynamic ads were also noticed, in this case, much longer, which is what we want to be able to see. So using a stand like this really makes it possible to actually aggregate these kind of metrics pretty easily. So again, if you're attempting a mobile eye tracking study and you're considering a stand like this, in my experience, the pros of this is that while it is fixed, you actually can configure this in any way you want. So you can adjust how close the device is to the participant. You can track any kind of mobile device you have. You can adjust portrait or landscape depending on the how users are predominantly going to be using that. And again, for the same reasons I mentioned, that consistency from one person to the next is great. However, there are some cons, as you can probably imagine, that with the device essentially bolted down, it is not natural. I mean, the users are typically holding in their hands, maybe putting the device in their lap, maybe switching hands. Even the fact that they don't have to hold the device frees up digits. So it's not quite as natural. We have to understand that as researchers. The participant is a bit more limited in where they can move. So there is some degree of movement. I can move side to side a little bit. I can move a little closer to the device or further away. But I'm still more or less constrained to essentially the desk or the table that I'm sitting at. And mobile devices, as you know, people lay on their couches, they're on the subway. The context of use can be all over the place. So it is a limitation. Also, I have to speak from personal experience that transporting these kinds of mobile stands is not overly pleasurable. So you have to consider that if you're going to be doing research studies across the country, that it's something you have to lug along with you. So, like I mentioned earlier, there's an alternative to a mobile stand. Eye tracking glasses are improving every day. Both two leading companies, SMI and Tobii, are both coming up with new generations all the time with their glasses. I have to say the latest generation glasses for both manufacturers are very good. They're offering high definition quality video, improved tracking, much easier calibration than they used to be just a few years ago. A few years ago, I probably would not have recommended to clients using glasses because of some of the downsides to it. But I think the technology has matured enough where using these for mobile-based studies, it actually is probably a recommended approach. And you can see here from this screenshot that it allows us to see it in essence through the participant's eyes. So whether they're holding a device on their lap or anywhere they are, they could be they could even be on a subway train. We're still able to track where they're looking, whether it's at the device or anything else contextually relevant to the environment. A lot of people are using these kinds of glasses for what we call second screen experiences, where there might be a television display going on, and there might be an accompanying mobile app on a tablet or on a phone, and we're able to seamlessly track what's going on the TV and what engages them there, and then also seamlessly what happens as they look back at their mobile device and the app, and back and forth, and understand that behavior, which can be quite useful. Just to emphasize the differences, you still can do qualitative research with a mobile stand. However, it's optimal and preferred for the glasses where you're really interested in understanding those behaviors. You want to watch and observe where the eyes are going in real time. You're watching those video replays. You can see an example here. I mean, we're watching where the eye is going. We're watching the actual eyeball and the movements as they go across the screen. What I call regressive saccades is basically the quick eye movements that are occurring. Regressive in the sense that if I see a participant looking back and back over the same kind of text or the same button or some sort of interface element, there's something going on there. There's a reason why they keep looking back at it. It could be confusion. They don't understand what it means, or they're confused about how it would operate. Attention or inattention is very important. Are they really attending to the device? Are they distracted? Are they looking away? How long are they distracted? Where are they really focusing their attention on the mobile device? As you know, if you do mobile experience design and research, you know that, we have their attention for very short periods of time. There tend to be a lot of distractions in a mobile environment. The eye tracker is really good, especially with the glasses, to understand not just what is happening on the screen, but the surrounding elements as well. So the way we do analysis with the glasses is different than the stand. We're focusing on watching the eye gaze replay videos quite a bit. We're doing a lot of manual coding for logging key events. That could be events that are happening within the mobile experience, so page transitions, different activities that are happening on the screen, or other elements that are competing for their attention. So again, just to give you an example of when I talk about qualitative findings, again, this is just watching many people play this game and watching those behaviors and coding, and we happen to notice the same repeated behavior that when an ad animated in, if that ad happened to be in the path of their eye movements based on what's happening in the game, that tends to trigger when they would look at the ad. So again, if they were interacting with something, ad flies in, we're watching their eye movements go, and all of a sudden their eye movements intersect with the ad. Bingo, you got them to look at the ad. Another example was, we're studying different kind of player behaviors. So those who were kind of in the zone where they were really focused on the gameplay, you could tell they were very serious and very particular with how they're interacting. Tended to be more of the advanced players. They completely ignored the ads. We saw the behaviors, we saw that where their attention was focused, and it was very far away from anything that was ad related. So again, if you're designing mobile mobile advertising placement is tricky. It's something that users are aware of and are, if they can, deliberately not looking at the ad. But depending on how the game dynamics or app dynamics play out, you can trigger them to look at it. So, pros and cons of this kind of approach. As you can imagine, it's a much more natural behavior, as is shown in the picture here. You can have them sitting on a couch, interacting with an iPad. These kind of studies can take place in a home, in an office environment, or in a usability lab, depending on where you're doing this. But it allows you really, though, to get out in the field, if you're doing this kind of study, especially mobile studies, I find that contextual element, the environmental elements, are really important. So the glasses kind of free you from the lab environment. Excuse me. But that being said, the qualitative focus is really what the glasses are best at. If you're going to try to do a quantitative analysis, it can be done with the glasses, but it's incredibly labor intensive. So just keep that in mind, because it's very difficult with the participant moving their head, moving all around, changing their perspective of holding their device up or down, and of course the actual device itself is probably moving around. So it makes it very difficult to compare across people in a quantitative way. The other limitation specific to the eye tracking glasses is you have to make sure you screen out the participants who wear any type of eyewear. It will not work with regular glasses on top of the eye tracking glasses, at least at this time with the current technology available. With the eye tracking stand, you can get away with people with just normal eyeglasses, but not people with bifocals or trifocals still. So hopefully that gives you a sense of the two prominent technologies that are out there for tracking mobile devices. Again, it's important to know which tool is really good for which kind of use. Some general takeaways from this talk is that, if you haven't experienced eye tracking before, I'd highly encourage you to try it out. It can be quite enlightening to really understand what your users are paying attention to interface and sometimes more importantly, what they're not paying attention to. And in my experience, that can be quite eye-opening for designers and researchers, where we expect people to look at the things that we've designed, and somehow that doesn't pan out. Mobile, in particular, as I mentioned, contextual and environmental, those are factors that are very important, and especially with the glasses, we're able to get that experience much better than with the stand. But be aware that the technology is evolving, both the glasses and the stand, and that you have to make sure you have participants who are possible to use, excluding people who wear glasses for the eye tracking glasses, and also just making sure that you're sort of prepared for usually a significant amount of data analysis required for the quantitative as well as the qualitative. So if I've piqued your interest in this topic, as mentioned earlier, Jen and I are very proud of a book that came out last May, Eye Tracking and User Experience Design. We encourage you to pick it up. If you have any interest in how eye tracking is applied to the UX field at large, it covers everything from mobile experiences to laptops to special populations to gaming to social media. We really tried to hit on topics that are relevant to the UX community, and also we had a lot of great contributors to the book as well, who you'll be able to hear their voice. And if you'd like to see and hear Jen and I live, as well as get some actual hands-on eye tracking experience, please join us for our Human-Computer Interaction International Conference in LA this summer. So I'd encourage you to register for that. And yeah, we look forward to hearing from you. And Jen and I are happy to stick around for a bit longer and answer any of your questions you might have.
Okay. So let's go ahead and jump into the Q&A portion. Thank you, Andrew and Jennifer. You guys did a really great job. So we've gotten a bunch of questions coming in. A lot of them were repetitive, so let's jump into those. Let's start with the ones that were most recently coming to you about the glasses for the eye tracking. So a lot of people were curious how the data would look if you want to analyze it quantitatively. And another question kind of related is, how is the data stored and collected? Is there a wired connection of the glasses to a PC or some storage device?
Okay, so it's sort of a multi-part question.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll work my way backwards. So it depends on the manufacturer. I know that Tobii, you can have a wired connection to a computer. Of course, in that case, the person's tethered to the laptop, which isn't preferable. I believe SMI and Tobii have portable units where it's something that can fit on the person. So total freedom of movement, where it's just a little device so it can fit in their pocket or on their belt buckle, and that allows them to move around freely. To answer the question about, if you do want to do a quantitative study with the glasses, it is possible. However, it's, like I mentioned, a manual process where you're going to have a researcher who has a lot of patience and is willing to look at the frames and make sure that participants are all, in essence, looking at the same thing in more or less the same way, so you can have the same sort of orientation of the screen and hopefully the eye tracker, so that way you can have an overlay across participants for your areas of interest. However, I would not recommend it. It's a very time-intensive process, and it's it's probably not the method to go if you really need the quantitative aspect.
Great, thanks. So this was another popular question that we got lots of variations of, and I can let Jen go ahead and answer it since she was answering a lot of the attendees who were submitting the question, and that was, is it possible to conduct remote usability testing with the eye tracker? So we can pass that off to Jen if she wants to take it. Take it.
Thanks. Yeah, it's not possible at this time. With the current devices that are on the market, you really have to be in person. As Andrew showed some images of the equipment, so you really have to be there. I don't think we're that far off, just with the quality of webcams getting better and better. I don't think we're that far off from having some products that we can use remotely, but we're not there yet. And I believe.
Thanks, Jen. So another question that came in that Jen answered as well, so she can feel free to jump in. Once you've decided on a configuration, isn't it necessary to keep the configuration the same for all users, regardless of the height, facial structure, glasses use, etc.?
Yeah, it's actually not true. You don't have to keep the configuration the same unless you want to aggregate across all of your participants and create a heat map. Then of course that will be important, because when you're configuring the physical space, you want to make sure that for each participant, the eye tracker knows like that the edges are right here and right here. So you'll want to keep that configuration the same. But if you're going to be doing individual gaze plots or video clips to demonstrate the findings, then it's actually, you don't need to keep that configuration the same. And especially when it comes to something like the glasses, it's impossible to keep the configuration the same because you're in the real world. So that's more of an issue or an option when you're using the stand, which stays in one place.
Great, thanks. So another question going back to the glasses that a lot of people are interested in. What are the steps to calibrate the stand device and the glasses?
I'm happy to take that one. So that process has improved, certainly with the glasses, in my experience. But starting with the stand, so typically the way this works is the eye tracker is kind of dumb, and it needs to understand where the device is that you want to track and what the spaces you want to track. So so I can speak to the example of Toby's device, is that there's a calibration plate that sits on top of the stand, and then you have users actually look at points on that physical board, and as they're looking at each point, it's able to then map that to the eye tracker. For the glasses, again, it's a three-dimensional space. You typically have to have the participant look at a solid colored wall, so just having them stand face the wall. And then there's, depending on which device you're using, there's some target that you need the person to look at. And depending on the device, you may have to have them look at multiple targets, again, to define the parameter of where they are in relation to the eye tracker. Again, the process has become a lot less painless, and I find the calibrations are much more accurate than they were even a year ago.
Thank you, Andrew. So we still have questions coming in, but we're coming to a close, so we want to stop promptly. Thank you, everyone, for attending the webinar today. We really do hope you're able to gain constructive insight into eye tracking for a mobile device. Feel free to continue submitting questions to the Q&A box, and we will be getting those questions in, and we'll be responding in a timely manner. You can also get in touch with Key Lime Interactive by emailing marketing@keylimeinteractive.com, and we'll be happy to get a conversation started with you that way. Again, thank you for your time, and this concludes our webinar for today. Have a great day, and thank you to Jen and Andrew.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.